Nowadays, cannabis plays a hugely important role in our society, but the plant's history is a little harder to parse. So what did 420 look like 2 millennia ago? Much of what we know about ancient Rome's relationship to cannabis comes from a small number of scattered texts. Any cups, bowls, or containers used to house cannabis have been long destroyed and can't be chemically analyzed. And even though cannabis shows up in ancient literature, it's never directly explained, as the audience of the time wouldn't have needed such explanation. Think about it. If a play written in 2023 featured a scene in which a character casually popped a couple of aspirin, would that character go on a detailed diatribe about aspirin's function, purpose, creation, and role in society? Almost certainly not. And yet, many aspects of Roman cannabis usage will be strangely familiar to us today. The first documented use of marijuana was in 2800 BCE in China, before the plant traveled through India, the Middle East, Greece, and Rome. It was commonly used to treat arthritis, asthma, depression, pain, and other medical conditions. By the 1st century, the Romans knew it enough to distinguish between wild and domesticated cannabis, that is, marijuana and hemp. During this period, people around the world would have pressed cannabis to make hash or resin, passed water through it like tea, or thrown the psychoactive strain over heat and inhaled it.
Wow, man. That's some heavy shit.
Cannabis found its way into Roman society in part through medicine, and much of that medical knowledge came from Greece. In fact, it's impossible to talk about cannabis in ancient Rome without talking about Greece. Our most methodical and thorough source of information comes from the Greek physician Pedanius Dioscorides, who in 77 CE compiled his 5-volume tome De Materia Medica, which translates to On Medical Matters. This text catalogs the descriptions and medical applications of 600 herbs, roots, stems, fruits, vines, and animal products in great detail. He says that opium, for instance, makes for a good anesthetic during surgery. Dioscorides separates cannabis into cannabis amaros and cannabis agria. Dioscorides says that cannabis amaros acts as birth control and reduces earaches if eaten. When boiled and topically applied, cannabis agria reduces inflammation and fluid retention and disperses hardened matter around the joints. That is, it helps with arthritis. Around the same time, Roman author and naturalist Pliny the Elder echoed Dioscorides in his 37-book-long natural history, although he was far less precise about the subject. Pliny writes that eating cannabis seeds, quote, makes the genitals impotent, and eating its root when boiled eases cramped joints, while its juice regulates the bowels of animals. Pliny also claims the juice of the plant drives out of the ears the worms and of any other creature that has entered them, which might refer to treating earaches. Even though hemp bags, shoes, and clothing might be more of an ecological fashion statement nowadays than anything else, it seems that the ever-practical Romans valued the practical uses of cannabis above its medical uses. Our modern idea of hemp is that of cannabis with a tetrahydrocannabinol content of 0.3% or less, but this definition didn't exist in ancient Rome or Greece. Nevertheless, in the ancient world, certain cannabis plants were considered to be particularly useful for textiles and related products. In natural history, Pliny the Elder describes 3 qualities of cannabis separated by region, which need to be dried, cleaned, and peeled before being used to make different products. The best, he says, comes from a region called Arab Hisar and makes good hunting nets. Dioscorides similarly says that cannabis amaros is a plant of considerable use in this life for twisting very strong ropes. It is also believed that the Romans used cannabis for rope, boat sails, and wicker goods like baskets, clothing, and shoes. By all accounts, the ancient Romans were far less interested in recreational cannabis use than they were in making textiles. In fact, some historians have suggested that the Romans seemed oddly naive about, or disinterested in, the psychoactive properties of cannabis. That's not to say it wasn't known to the ancient world, though. The Greek comic Ephippas wrote about getting high on cannabis seeds back in the 4th century BCE. A century earlier, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote in the histories about Scythian nomads throwing cannabis on hot coals in tents and howling in their joy at the results. So why so little mention of such uses centuries later? Here we come across the same issue we alluded to before. What happened versus what was written down? Ancient Rome considered itself the most moral of nations and valued modesty, moderation, and temperance above all other virtues, especially as they related to public duties and reputation. Is it unreasonable to conclude that Romans would be unwilling to openly discuss using cannabis recreationally? And yet, in natural history, Pliny the Elder at least describes cannabis as the laughing weed. He also says it can be added to wine to make it even more intoxicating.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
Along those lines, it's entirely possible that Roman life might have involved much more recreational cannabis usage than was recorded. Roman values were based around restraint, which in a religious and political sense meant intense conservatism and suspicion of change. Top to bottom, Roman life was steeped in ancestor worship, gods and rites of the home, daily offerings and prayers, ceremonial magic, nature worship, the religion of the state, and so on. In other words, if the Romans were going to adopt cannabis use in any kind of pervasive religious sense, its use would have had to be deeply involved in the foundations of Roman religion, or else be heavily justified in practice. This means that Romans most likely didn't use cannabis directly in religious ceremonies, but in more fuzzy, religion-adjacent areas. That said, it was occasionally seen as a symbolic plant. In the 3rd century CE, Roman dream interpreter Artemidorus mentioned the significance of seeing cannabis fiber in a dream versus seeing a cannabis flower. Nevertheless, while some have speculated that cannabis played an important part in Roman religious rites, there's no real evidence to substantiate such claims, especially when it came to mainstream religion.